Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Franz Kafka's story, The Metamorphosis, not only is Gregor transformed and the relations within his family change, we also get to see interesting responses, reactions, attitudes towards him on the part of other people. And it could be interesting to compare and contrast three different sets of those from people who are, you could say, in the household, though not of the household. So we're leaving aside the chief clerk who comes to visit and Gregor, tries to get out of his room to talk to and who leaves never to come back again. We're talking about people who actually spend time within the Samsa family flat and in some respect become part of the household, if only for certain times of the day. And so we've really got three different sets of reactions. And we could say that they're falling under horror, a kind of propriety and willingness to exploit the situation, and then a kind of rough friendliness or openness, right? So three different human reactions. So horror is the servants, and there's a little bit of ambiguity in the story, in part because early on Kafka's going to use one term that makes you think there's really only one servant, the Dienstmädchen, but eventually he'll also talk about a contrast between the Dienstmädchen and the cook, the Köchin. And we're going to find out that there is a servant girl who lives and works within the household, and she actually gets named. Anna is her name. She and Greta are both sent out to get on errands to get a doctor and a locksmith early on. And we're going to jump right to the cook. So the cook is going to leave first. We read that for 2 whole days there were family consultations at every mealtime about what should be done, about Gregor. But also between meals the same subject was discussed, for there were always at least 2 members of the family at home, since no one wanted to be alone in the flat, and to leave it quite empty was unthinkable. On the very first of these days, the household cook. Now, in the German, it actually doesn't say the cook, it says the Dienstmädchen, but later on we find out that the cook is the one who left, right? So the household cook, it was not quite clear what and how much she knew of the situation, went down on her knees to his mother and begged leave to go. And when she departed, a quarter of an hour later, gave thanks for her dismissal with tears in her eyes, as if for the greatest benefit that could have been conferred on her, and without any prompting swore a solemn oath she would never say a single word to anyone about what had to happen. So Gregor's sister now begins having to cook, and they've lost one member of the household, although a servant in this respect, who is leaving because of horror, and she's going to keep the family secret. What about the servant girl, the Dienstmädchen, Anna? Well, we read just a little bit earlier that Gregor was fed once in the early morning while his parents and the servant girl were still asleep. So this is Greta, his sister, doing this. The servant girl lives there, right? and a second time after they'd all had their midday dinner, and for then his parents took a short nap. Right? They're out of the picture, and the servant girl could be sent out on some errand or another by his sister. Not that they would have wanted Gregor to starve, but perhaps they could not have borne to know more about his feeding than from hearsay, and perhaps his sister wanted to spare them such little anxieties whenever possible, since they had quite enough to bear as it was. Now that applies more to her parents, but perhaps also to the servant girl. Greta wants to kind of keep this to herself, keep it within the family. So what else do we know about the servant girl? Well, we find out a little bit later on when Greta wants to start changing Gregor's environment, that she got in her head the idea of giving him as wide a field as possible to crawl in, removing the pieces of furniture, but that was more than she could manage by herself. Why? She couldn't ask her father to help her. As for the servant girl, a young creature of 16 who had the courage to stay on after the cook's departure, she could not be asked to help. Why not? Because she actually doesn't have that much courage. She had begged as a special favor she might keep the kitchen door locked and open it only on a definite summons, so there was nothing to do but to ask her mother sometime when the father was out. So the servant girl is pretty freaked out by Gregor. And we're going to find that a little bit later, she actually is dismissed by the family, and they hire somebody else to do some of the work. So that's one set of approaches, attitudes. Horror. This is terrible. I don't want to be around this creature. Then we find out later that the family has taken in lodgers. And this is people who are living. They occupy one room of the flat, which means that all sorts of stuff has to be shoved into Gregor's room. They bring their own furnishings with them, and they become part of the household. So we read, here we go. One of the rooms had been let to 3 lodgers, these serious gentlemen, all 3 of them with full beards, as Gregor once observed through a crack in the door, and we learn that they have a passion for order. And the term here, passion for order, passion is kind of a neutral term, peinlich auf Ordnung. They are these pinched people. They really are fastidious about order. And we read here that now they were members of the household and all its arrangements. They wanted order not only in their room, but everywhere else, especially in the kitchen. Superfluous, not to say dirty objects, they could not bear, right? And so they're kind of picky bastards, you could say. The lodgers spend their time eating meals in the living room, and this kind of shows you what's happening to the family. So the lodgers get to be in the best room. Where's the family? The family itself took its meals in the kitchen as if they are servants, right? Gregor's room is closed up. He's not supposed to be looking out at the lodgers, but he, of course, does see them on occasion when the charwoman leaves the door open and it stays ajar. And we get this interesting vignette. Gregor and his where formerly Gregor and his father and mother had eaten their meals, they set themselves at the top end of the table, unfolded their napkins, took knife and fork in hand. At once his mother appeared in the other doorway with a dish of meat, and close behind her was her sister with a dish of potatoes piled high. The lodgers bent over the food set before them as if to scrutinize it before eating. In fact, the man in the middle, who seemed to pass for an authority with the other 2, cut a piece of meat as it lay on the dish, obviously to discover if it were tender or should be sent back to the kitchen. He showed satisfaction, and Gregor's mother and sister, who had been watching anxiously, breathed freely and began to smile. So clearly, they're a bit intimidated by these lodgers who are kind of lording it over them. And, we see this happen a bit more with the incident of the playing. Greta is playing the violin. The lodgers say, have her come out here and play. And then they don't like the playing, right? So they're smoking cigars and making faces. You can divine their irritation. Gregor sneaks out and gets seen. And then what happens? The lodger in the middle, "Mr. Samsa," cried the middle lodger to Gregor's father, and pointed without wasting any more at Gregor, now working himself forward. His father tries driving the lodgers back into their room, and they demanded explanations of his father. And then what do they ultimately do? So they say, "I beg to announce that because of the disgusting conditions prevailing in this household and family, I give you notice on the spot. Naturally, I won't pay you a penny for the days I've lived here. On the contrary, I shall consider bringing an action for damages against you based on claims, believe me, that will be easily accessible of proof." And then his two friends say, "And we too give notice on the spot." And they close the door with a slam, right? So this is going to be a financial catastrophe for the family. They've already put out for these lodgers. They've let them stay there. They've fed them. And now they're not going to get paid. Now notice what these lodgers do the next day after it's found out that Gregor has died. So the three lodgers emerged from their room and were surprised to see no breakfast. "Where's our breakfast?" said the middle lodger peevishly to the charwoman, and then she shows them Gregor. And then Mr. Samsa comes out and he says, "Get the hell out of here." And you can wonder if they put their notice, why are they expecting breakfast? Because they're exploiting the situation. They're not really disgusted. They are using a show of propriety to get over, to avoid having to pay for things. And Mr. Samsa, Gregor's father, kicks them out, and they don't actually put up a fuss. They leave, right? Now, we have a third attitude with the aforementioned charwoman, who's a very interesting character. We find out, here we go. The household was reduced more and more. The servant girl was turned out. A gigantic, bony charwoman with white hair flying around her head came in morning and evening to do the rough work. Everything else was done by Gregor's mother. So she is loud, open, strong. These are sort of things we can say about her. She slams the doors even though they don't like her doing that. And she does all the rough work. She carries things around and helps out with the place. She sweeps, as we know, because she's got a broom that she's going to poke Gregor with a little bit later. And what we find with her, she, unlike everybody else, is not repulsed, not disgusted, not even afraid of Gregor. And it's, kind of interesting to see this. So we read, this old widow whose strong bony frame had enabled her to survive the worst a long life could offer, by no means recoiled from Gregor. So she has seen a lot. She's been married, she's seen death, she's poor, she's gone through all sorts of things. Without being in the least curious, she'd once by chance opened the door of his room, and at the sight of Gregor, who'd taken by surprise, began to rush to and fro, though no one was chasing him, merely stood there with her arms folded. She's not bothered by him. From that time, she never failed to open his door a little for a moment, morning and evening, to have a look at him. At first, she even used to call him to her with words which apparently she took to be friendly, such as, "Come along then, you old dung beetle," or "Look at the old dung beetle then." Now, Gregor doesn't like this and eventually is so irritated with her that he will, slowly creep up and act as if he's going to menace her. And what's her reaction? She picks up a chair and she says, "So you're not coming any nearer?" And Gregor turns away and she quietly puts the chair back in the corner. She's not, sadistic. She's not bullying. She's just not going to take any crap from him. And there's the possibility of human connection there. But, Gregor doesn't like the way that she talks to him, and she's not going to, do things differently than that. But she is treating him as if he's I won't say a human being, but a being who kind of matters, right? And she is the one who discovers him dead at the very end of the story. She comes in and she looks in his room. She thought he was lying motionless on purpose, pretending to be in the sulks. She credits him with every kind of intelligence. She pokes him with a broom, and then finds when he not only doesn't move, but his body moves, and then nothing happens. He's dead. And so she goes and, the lodgers come out. She's like, hey, come check this out. And then she tells the Samsas as well that he's dead. And, later on in the day, while they're talking about things, she's like waiting. And then they say, well, what is it then? And the charwoman, giggling so amiably that she could not at once continue, it's just this. You don't need to bother about how to get rid of the thing next door. It's been seen to already. So she's, socially awkward, you could say. Not a respecter of persons, but a straight shooter, as we often say. Mr. Samsa decides that they're going to fire her later on after she leaves. But she's somebody who shows us that it's possible to have kind of a humane, if not the only human, attitude towards Gregor. And so we see three different sets of reactions by people who are brought into some sort of contact. We've got like horror, recoiling, fear, whatever else, disgust being provoked. We have a kind of surface level thing that's being used to exploit a situation. We don't really know whether the lodgers are disgusted or not. And then we have the charwoman who just takes things as they are and cleans up and treats Gregor as if he were just any other person that she would come into contact with. So very interesting reflections that are woven into this story.